Welcome back to this Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. With me, I have Professor Bola Akintenrewa, Director General, Bolitech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Professor Anthony Kila, Professor of Strategy and Development and Director, Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies. And Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough. Yemi and Professor Akintenrewa and Professor Kila, you've all listened to our two guests, Mr. Dare Babarinsa, on the Afenifere, do we say Dibeku, since it says there is no crisis, there is no conflict, contrary to the evidence of our eyes. And then, of course, the Tigray war and the peace accord that has been brokered by Chief Olusegun Obasanjo and others under the auspices of the African Union. Let me start with you, Professor Akintenrewa, your take on both subjects.
He's calling you, Yemi.
Professor Akintenrewa, can you hear me? Okay, if you can't hear me, I have Professor Kila with me right here in the Abuja studio. Professor Kila, what do you think?
Well, I think alphabetical order and the way you've done it, let's start with the Afenifere issues. It's an interesting and somewhat sad development of what is going on. Let us start by saying that it's a good thing that Babaris has tried to, in a way, say there's no crisis, and everybody's trying to say that. But there is a bit of a problem, actually more than a problem. And it's a sad development that partisan politics tend to tear union and leadership in Yoruba nation rather than unite like it happens elsewhere. I think it's an indictment of leadership and ability to coordinate issues. That is the sort of contingental issue. But there are two forces at play here. One is an ontological conception and misconception of Afenifere, and the second is a sort of functional metamorphosis of Afenifere itself. The ontological part, is that contrary to what people think, Afenifere was not conceived as a super party's general pan-Yoruba cultural movement. It was actually conceived as the hand of a political party, of the action group. And in history, it has tried to follow the philosophy of Aoism by defending those who embrace that philosophy. Over time, this preamble, I hope our viewers are not bored, is crucial to have it in order to understand what is going on. Over time, Afenifere has somewhat tried to metamorphose into something non-partisan, non-political, or at least bipartisan or super parties that follows agenda. And I think it's struggling with that at the moment, because what is going on is that one expects Afenifere to have one voice, and whatever I say, everybody goes there. But it has to be one voice. I think the challenge here, beyond factions of who's endorsing that candidate or another candidate, is that the pan-Yoruba group, the sort of cultural group, the ethnic national identity group of Yoruba leaders, needs to find a way to understand that there's something that goes beyond partisan politics, and that perhaps it's a myth to expect the whole nation to speak with one voice. And that, for me, is the sad and fascinating thing to manage. A lot of people have argued, so at the moment, there seem to be sort of three voices in Yoruba land now. One now minority voice that say, do not participate in election. The major voices that say, let's go left and let's go right. And I think overall, what needs to be learned is that going on, people need to be used to plurality of voices. The problem here is representation of voices. Friends and foes of this great, fantastic group called Afenifere, which is the mother group of most Yoruba organizations, talk about consultation and representation. It is argued that whoever any side of Afenifere has endorsed or not endorsed, where was the consultation done? In whose name they're actually speaking. That is a more deep conversation to be heard about Afenifere. But I believe, as you know, I believe Afenifere has a role to play, and I think it just needs to modify itself. And that's my take on that. In Ethiopia, on the matter of Ethiopia and the President Obasanjo, Chief Olubasanjo issue, I think there are 4 things to look at. Number 1 is that any kind of peace agreement is a good agreement. We just need to hope it is sustained. We cannot say it's another one and just not celebrate it. We have to celebrate it. Number 2, you know, it's a very good thing for the AU that some of us has called a paper tiger for long. It's a good thing that the AU is doing something is happening under its umbrella that is making sense, you know, that is having some impact. Of course, one cannot but be happy that our own Chief Obasanjo is the face and the hand of such thing. You know, that is a fantastic thing. I don't know if you can get a Nobel Prize for that, but I think it's a great thing.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kila. Let's go back to the Lagos studio. Professor Bola Akintenewa, do you agree with Professor Kila's position in that latest regard, and also his comments about Afenifere?
Yeah, to a great extent. I do agree with Professor Kila. Although I did not have the opportunity of listening to Ambassador Akisaya, however, from the explanation of Professor Kila, I can agree with him. First, when we are discussing Ethiopia, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo is always a pride, a source of sweet inspiration, and a gentleman with very sagacious mind. Let me tell you that on August 26, 2021, when His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, considered to appoint Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as his high representative of the African Union to the Horn of Africa. So he considered the experience that he had been many times head of state. He had played very active part. As a matter of fact, he was once, in fact, many times chairman of the African Union Assembly, you know, Assembly of Head of States. So, in this particular case, Obasanjo has brought much, in fact, a lot of experiences in mediating the conflict. The point to note from this one is simply that the principle of mediation in international law and relations requires that a mediator must be acceptable to all the disputing parties. Now, the acceptance of Olusegun Obasanjo, not only by the AU Commission, but by the disputing parties, compelled me to see in Olusegun Obasanjo a person of pride. Now, on the dispute itself, if we move away from people dealing with the issue, now Ethiopia is a problematic on its own, and Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, with the other members of the mediation team, like the Kenyatta, who was there also, had experience on the matter. Please let me tell you that Chief Olusegun Obasanjo was actually the chairman of the AU when negotiations in Sudan, when the comprehensive agreement COP was done in 2005. If you look at the efforts the Nigerian diplomatic machinery put in place, there is no way you will not always call on Nigeria to come and help mediate very critical situations. So the achievements must begin from that perspective. As a matter of fact, we need to put in place the consideration that peace agreement is predicated on mutual trust. The way the disputing parties had trust in Olusegun Obasanjo is the same way there must be mutual trust in the implementation of the agreement. Why I agreed with Professor Killer when he talked about sustaining the implementation, that is where mutual trust comes in. And in this particular case, the moment the disputing parties that had mutual trust today now worked against that, the agreement will collapse. Therefore, all efforts must be made to ensure that room is not given for distrust. Then on the dispute, misunderstanding between our father, Fashoranti, and my second father, Adebanjo, I agree on a number of points raised by my brother, Dare Babanisa. He raised 3 issues indirectly. The first one is the relationship between a leadership and acting leadership. Now, how can Baba Fashoranti be considered a leader and Baba Adebanjo as acting leader? When people are acting, when they take actions in acting capacity, it simply means that the leader is not there. Simultaneously speaking, how will there be an effective, a de facto leader, and then another de facto acting leader? First problem. The second problem is the meaning of Afenifere, which is what is responsible for the misunderstanding between Baba Adebanjo and Baba Fashoranti. Afe eni fun ire. That is, you love, you like an individual, any, for goodness. You want goodness for another person. That is the philosophy, the philosophical foundation of Afenifere. Afenifere is for fairness, is for goodness, is for altruism. Okay? It debunks selfishness. Consequently, it doesn't look at ethnicism from that perspective. So, when you are an Afenifere man, it means that you will live by objectivity of purpose. It's subjectivity. There's no sentiments there. So, if you ask me as a Yoruba man, for instance, when Dare Babanisa is talking about leader, and this one is ex-general, this one is ex-governor, and then from that perspective, they are a leader. I ask for myself, how do they define a leader? A leader is not simply, or let me say, a leader can be identified, defined by many factors. Age factor.
Professor Akinterewa.
By Yoruba something. But now,
Professor Akinterewa.
Yes.
Yeah, if you may just wrap up quickly so that we can have Yemi Adamolekun also say something.
Yes, thank you.
But just by way of historical fact.
Thank you very much.
By way of historical fact. This is not the first time that you will have in Afenifere a leader and an acting leader. When Pa Jasin was there, at some point, Pa Ibrahim Adesanya was made acting leader. and then he eventually became leader after Pa Jasin passed in 1997. Please quickly, so that I can take Adamolekun's input.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You see, the mere fact that you have a leader, an acting leader, at the same time does not mean that conceptually, when we are discussing, I am trying to say that technically speaking, it cannot work. You see, the beauty of our discussion is that we are discussing intellectually. That's just the issue. But my own concern, let me conclude by saying that, look, I see myself as a qualified, as a bona fide Yoruba leader, by my own definition. So you cannot say because somebody was ex-general and ex-governor who was elected for 4 years, and by so doing he becomes a leader. No, it's not a leader. I'm a leader on my own right. But who consulted me? Fortunately, he didn't consult me. Adebanjo didn't consult me.
Thank you, Prof.
But we follow, I conclude, yeah.
You are concluding the second time, Prof.
I'm having noise here. I am simply saying that, look, a leader is a leader by envisioning, by missioning. Then we will follow them philosophically, regardless of age. Adebanjo is a leader, and I'm not contesting the fact that Fashionat is also a leader.
Thank you. Okay, that's clear enough. Yemi Adamolekun, your turn.
What would you like me to say? Good afternoon.
Please go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm serious though. You didn't ask me a question. What would you like me to talk
I
about?
ready to comment on the two topics, the Afenifere conversation we had with Mr. Dare Babarinsa, and then also the Tigray war and the role played by various stakeholders in getting a peace accord signed this week.
Ah, right, okay. So let's start with Tigray. And I think just to echo what Professor Akintayo had said on the role of Olusegun Obasanjo, I mean, the general has many fans and many people who don't like him within Nigeria, especially given his role in the third term agenda, and also his role in sort of certain foundational things that we're still dealing with in Nigeria that maybe if he had handled while he had the chance, we wouldn't still be here now. Issues with our constitution being top of that list. But I think what we cannot be taken away from him is the role that he plays on the international stage. And even at 85 or 80, almost to 90, he's still very active, and he takes the honor given to him to mediate in this thing seriously. And he's in one country or the other. And also I think the point of that for me is the point Professor Akintayo made about trust. So because he takes it seriously, when he shows up at these events, the people that he's then mediating with also take it seriously enough to listen to him and then trust him, if I want to use that word. But as there's one thing to sign a piece of paper, the next thing is to implement. And that's when we will actually see what really the sort of purpose, if there was really truly a determination to do this. And it's unfortunate. I mean, lives lost, people displaced, setting the country back. I mean, I haven't read any reports, but easily a number of years, if not a decade, given this war that lasted 2 years, a war that now that we've reconciled, we wonder could we not have prevented. But and I parallel that, I think, to Nigeria in some of the conversations we refuse to have in the context of people who want to what's the English word now, secede. And so Biafra, we haven't had the conversation. It's the response to Biafra is, you cannot go, why are you making noise? And shut up, literally is the response. The federal government hasn't said, let's have this conversation. So for sake of argument, something does happen. Do we then want to have a challenge that will now come back to the table 2 years later and then have a conversation? When we can have a conversation ab initio. Now to Afenifere, I mean, I'm going to read an excerpt from... Were you saying something?
Please go ahead. I'm listening to you.
Okay. All right, excellent. I'm going to read an excerpt from today's This Day. that ties to this whole issue. Starting paragraph. Fashoranti was said to have stepped aside and appointed Adebanjo the acting leader. Now Afenifere, in my estimation, is a relic of our recent past. They did so well for us during the June 12 matter and will continue to receive our gratitude and thanks. But things are different now. And I wanted to, there was a comment there anyway about the electoral value. And I think the unfortunate part for me in this leader, yes, they're leaders, and I agree obviously with Professor Akinteriwa, but in the context of an organization, you can only have one leader. So if there's an acting leader and a camp thinks that, well, if we go to the leader that's resting, quote unquote, and get his blessing, we can obviously, because again, it's propaganda and PR, we can obviously flip that to set the two people against each other, especially because they are one Afenifere under Pa Adebanjo is very clearly supporting Peter Obi. And so a blessing, quote unquote, for Tinubu for Fashoranti would imply that Fashoranti is supporting Tinubu. But Pa Fashoranti came out very clearly and said he's a Yoruba man. He came to him for prayers and blessing. Of course he would bless him. And if anybody else comes and says they want to be prayed for and blessed, that he will bless them. That praying for them does not connote an endorsement. And you will get the same thing from religious leaders saying that. And I think that's what it should be. You can go to an elder to pray for you and bless you in your ambition. Doesn't necessarily tie it to the endorsement, not only of the individual, but also of the organization. But it's also very interesting that in 2022, the leader of a pan-ethnic organization are two men that are over 90. And I think that there is something to be interrogated in that, Professor Akinteriwa, in a different conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Yemi Adamolekun. Quickly, let's take our next subject. The Academic Staff Union of Universities, which used to be the umbrella body of public university teachers in Nigeria, before the recent recognition of two parallel bodies by government, is set for a fresh battle over the decision of government to pay them half salaries for the month of October 2022. Minister of Labor and Employment, Chris Ngige, said the federal government cannot go against the no work, no pay rule as it affects members of ASU, and that their October salaries were computed on this basis. Already, the leadership of the University Teachers Union had summoned an emergency meeting of its National Executive Council to decide to agree on an appropriate response to the latest development. National President of ASU, Professor Emmanuel Usodeke, confirmed the development. The thing to add is also that the council to ASU, Femi Falana SAN, in a statement today, has said that, well, in 2021, when nurses and midwives went on strike for months, the president, did not agree that they should not be paid for the period during which they did not work. He said they should be paid. And also, resident doctors who had gone on strike for 2 months, last year, they were also paid for the period that they went on strike. And to quote Section 43 of the Trade Disputes Act will be disingenuous. All of this will amount to discrimination against the university teachers. And secondly, that government will be causing more trouble on campus if it were to pay members of the Congress of Nigerian Academics, CONWA, which has now been formally recognized by government. And third, that these universities are already giving lectures where lectures are not being given. Exams are being conducted for classes that were not held. And therefore, what the federal government, through the Ministry of Labor, is recommending is a prescription for chaos, a violation of the rights of the affected lecturers under Section 42 of the 1999 Constitution, which forbids discrimination on any grounds whatsoever. Let me start with you, Yemi Adamolekun. What do you think?
It was a bit of a challenge hearing you, but from what I gather, you're saying that number one, sorry?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So number one is the fact that they're getting half paid their salaries now that they're back at work. Secondly is that the government has approved another association to represent academics. And number 3 is the fact that students are being tested on lectures they did not receive. Am I correct?
I was quoting Femi Falana's SAN statement today, which was in addition to the narrative with which I started.
Right, okay, got it. Well, I think for me, fundamentally, really, we're shying away from dealing with the fundamental issues. So what stopped the strike after 8 months was that the federal government put into its budget, I forget how many hundreds of billions, for the 2023 budget, which it assured ASU that it would pass for revitalization of our universities and their salaries. The lecturers went back to work, and different schools started releasing different schedules. One of the schedules that I saw, for example, I believe was from Olabisi Onabanjo University, which had students in school a day before elections. So I'll actually focus on that really rather than anything else. Now, how do we have students in school a day before elections when the whole process of registering to vote that happened this year, the universities were shut down? So needless to say, sake of argument, a student at Olabisi Onabanjo University who lives in Ondo State, for example, was at home in Akure during the strike. So voter registration opens, decides I want to vote, registers in Akure. By the time, and voter registration as well as transfers ended July 31st. By the time she is done registering, school is back open, she's back in school, and they want her to be in class on February 23rd, an election on February 24th, and elections are February 25th. The window to transfer her voter's card has passed. So what do we expect her to do exactly? Leave school to go home so she can vote, or stay in school? So for me, I think, and I mentioned that to say that the more fundamental issues around how a tertiary education system is structured is not being discussed. ASU is going to start releasing statements, and that's what we're going to see unless they go on strike. This evening, Arise is going to have a town hall meeting with presidential candidates, security and economy as part of a series. I wonder if ASU has sort of engaged Arise to ensure that tertiary institutions and its funding and administration gets on an agenda as a single campaign that they are running as part of this election process. I keep saying it, ASU will protest and come out and fight. Something will happen, they will keep quiet. It's an election year. They've gone quiet. I haven't heard anything, but maybe I will be surprised.
Well,
I guess the point is that this is not sustainable until we shift how tertiary education is funded and managed in Nigeria. We will not be able to deliver for the 21st century, and ASU will continue to be subpar, quite frankly, in driving Nigeria's tertiary educational needs. Okay,
Professor Kila, your thoughts?
Well, my thought, I think, really, in a very commonsensical and logical way, the government, he's playing a fast one on ASU. Because if you agree that you're going to pay people and they go back, there's something fundamentally wrong to say, I forgot to tell you won't be getting your full payment. It's either they told them and ASU missed it, or ASU for some reason were told and they're pretending not to know. I think that's the kind of little factual thing we should be following on this one, because the reason why ASU came back is because they promised them they were going to get some money. Nobody said they were going to get half of it. I totally agree with Yemi Ademola. There needs to be a fundamental, holistic review of the way education is managed, tertiary education in particular. I argue the whole education sector. But I also think that we have a problem of leadership, to go back to Professor Akinteriwa's pet thing today. It appears Nigerian leaders do not like their professors, or they hate university. At least they do not respect it. They do not treat it with caution. They do not see it as the engine room of development, prosperity, growth, peace, understanding, civic living. I suspect that there is a disdain for education in this country, and it's a big shame. I also think that ASU needs to up his game. And here again, I agree with Yemi Ademola. I think they're not managing their perception very well. They're not winning hearts and minds, and they're not seeing themselves as a valuable, influential constituency. I say this knowing fully well, though, that a lot of people are trying to blackmail them. Because the moment ASU says something or try to hold a position, the ruling party is quick to call them an instrument of the opposition. But I think ASU needs to find some strategies that will actually say, how do we use our challenges in the time we live to achieve what we hope for? That is what strategy does for you. And I think our seniors think that way.
Okay, very quickly, let me go to Professor Akintenwa. Professor Akintenwa.
My brother Ruben, probably we should beg all the imams, the pastors, all those who are fasting, praying to God, to please pray for the Buhari administration. The Buhari needs special prayers, because when a minister becomes anti-party, when a minister becomes anti-president, when a minister, becomes anti-education, when a minister becomes anti-peace, anti-progress, anti-Nigeria, then that minister necessarily becomes a body. That minister cannot be fit enough to defend, to protect the national interest. Why? Many times we have discussed in this platform that the government is not on record, this particular government in itself is not on record to believe in the sanctity of agreements. It's not. Now, as Yemi and Professor Killer rightly pointed out that, look, it was because a sort of gentleman agreement, a sort of entente cordiale was reached. That was what prompted the ASU lecturers to go back. From the reports we had in the media, we were told that agreement was reached and the government, the federal government, agreed that 50% of the backlog of the 8 months, arrears will be paid 50%. If that was true, how do we now explain again that a minister of education, a minister of labor will now say they are paying on a pro rata basis? No. Sanctity of agreement requires commitment, whatever the conditions. Even if you are induced into error by signing, then you must first of all comply and then come back and explain. They take lecturers for granted. Now, the lecturers they don't want in Nigeria that they are complaining about, please, look at the statistics. Canada wants them very badly. And the lecturers are moving out. Why will a Buhari administration want to destroy Nigeria completely by destroying education? Education is the foundation of any national development, the world over. So in this case, please, I think that, like I listened to one Arise TV program early this morning, I think a Nigerian expert on labor was invited, and he reminded us that apart from University of Lagos, which had an act on the basis of his establishment, he did it. In fact, he reminded us that, look, University of Ibadan didn't have that act. He told us that it is the council, the governing council of the university, that has the full responsibility for fundraising, for administering any university, and that we should now begin to look along that particular direction. So if the Minister of Labor, for whatever reason, they want to remain myopic, they do not want Nigeria to progress, please let me conclude by simply saying that they should learn from this Yoruba proverb. If you do not because of yam eat oil, you must because of oil eat yam. Whatever the offense, whatever grievances,
on that note,
vendetta.
On that note, Prof, I get your point. It's a very oily, very messy matter. But I hope that it will be resolved. We'll take one more topic, probably our last topic of the day. President Muhammadu Buhari has reacted to the plan by the Central Bank of Nigeria to redesign and replace the 1,000 naira, 500 naira, and 200 naira notes, effective December 15. The president, according to a release issued on Sunday by his spokesman, Malam Garuba Shehu, said the decision of the Central Bank of Nigeria to launch new designs and replace high-value naira notes had his support, and he was convinced that the nation will gain a lot from the policy. Quickly, let me start with you, Professor Anthony Kila.
Oh, well, I think it's fascinating. I'm not used to finding President Buhari being so informed and so clear on issues. This is it's one of the few times in his 7-year plus in office where he's been, he's proven to be aware of what's going on and has a very clear opinion in real time. It's a shame, for any reason in the world, it's a shame that the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank are not on the same page on what they're doing. Whether or not the Constitution asks for it, I think courtesy demands, office courtesy demands and synergy demands that they're talking to each other. I think there's something wrong with that. There's a lot of conversation, even with my colleagues, or my fellow economists, there's a lot of conversation about the Naira change. Here's my take. I think philosophically it doesn't stand as a strong tool to change anything. I think it won't give us a quantum leap. But when we look at it practically, I think the average Mr. and Mrs. Nigeria do not have much to be afraid of from this policy. Those who live a normal average life. I think this is something that will affect people on the extremes. Either people who have millions or billions of naira at home, or people who have no bank account. The people who do normal transaction using transfers and using their cards and do not have money started out, it won't really affect them. But I do not like this idea of we're going to do this in 3 months and this from fair. I think it's not democratic. There is an echo of a military mindset in this way of doing, and I do not believe you can legislate the economy. I think it's a false impression. The idea that you would do one policy and you change the economy. By the way, since this thing has been announced, the naira has lost value. So we're plotting graphs and we're saying that it will be bad in the short term and perhaps it will improve later on. But nobody knows. Milton Keynes says, in the long run, we're all dead. So we don't know. But that's me.
Well, Yemi Adamolekum, have you taken your naira notes to the banks?
My naira note is in the bank, so there's nothing to take there. But I think it's a couple of things that I think are interesting. Number one, the fact that the president had to announce that he supports it. I'm not, as Professor Killer said, I'm not quite sure anybody expected him to say he didn't support it. Because the central bank governor might be many things, but I don't think he would take that kind of decision without getting the president's approval. Again, as Dr. Killer said, the fact that the Ministry of Finance and the CBN are not on the same page does speak volumes. Now, under the rationale given is the fact that it would help put illegal money back into the system, it will help our monetary policy, it would help this, it would help that. But there are 3 fundamental things that the central bank is doing, or not the central bank, the government is doing, that's not helping our economy. We have left those ones and we're focusing on redesigning Naira that has then thrown up other conversations about whose face will be on it. I saw Atiku saying that Obasanjo's face should be on it. Are we going to have Arabic inscription? Not Arabic, I forget what the word is now. Anyway, the Hausa inscriptions on it so people can read. And we're saying this was, 60 years ago. Literacy rates have improved. Do we need it? The new lower denominations that were redesigned didn't have it. Would they be removed from these ones? That has become the conversation. But we're losing money because our oil is being stolen, so we have a revenue problem. Number 2, we also have a spending problem because we're quite wasteful. Number 3, the central bank has created a system of arbitrage that it has tried to do nothing about over the last couple of years. So right now you have almost a 100% difference between the official rate and the black market rate. And the black market rate is just whatever it is at any point in time. So you have all of this in place, and yet he's saying that if he brings Naira that is under someone's bed into the bank, it will magically affect our money. enable our monetary policy to make sense. Or the last thing that we're doing, we've printed more money that is legally allowed. So technically, in a normal country, the central bank governor should probably be in jail because he's breaking the law very brazenly and nothing is happening. And so that is happening, but we're focused on money under people's beds that don't affect our GDP because they're not in circulation. So I'm a layman's economist, so I really don't get it. But the discordance between the Ministry of Finance and the central bank not dealing with like basic, let me not say basic issues, critical issues, and the fact that we're doing this in an election year just really speaks to where we've put ourselves. And President Buhari is not the one to have any strong statements on anything. So this is not surprising that he would not differ or be able to explain. I mean, literally, if somebody interviewed President Buhari and asked him what does he think this redesign of the Naira means for Nigeria, he would just tell you that it allows them to carry corrupt people. And that's to the extent that he would understand what the whole thing is about. Hey.
Well, Section 19 of the CBN Act requires the Central Bank of Nigeria to get clearance from the President of Nigeria if it's releasing its annual report, if it is going to make investments, offshore investments with Nigerian resources, and 3, if it's going to print new currency notes. And it's on the basis of that the CBN says what it has done is completely legal within the purview of Section 2 of the CBN Act of 2004 and also Section 19 of the same act. That's what the law says. Professor Akintenwa.
The legality is not in question. It's the functionality that we were discussing, not the legality.
Yeah, legality, illegality.
You see, any political... go ahead.
Rightly pointed out one aspect that, look, there's no reason why we shouldn't expect the president to approve of the initiatives of the CBN governor, Emefiele. But if we recall the fact that his predecessor, when he was there, Sanusi, and when he gave 100 million naira, donated that one, and there was controversy, his argument was that the CBN has an autonomous status. So if the CBN has autonomy, why will you expect that type of policy approval? That one is subject to debate. Second point, what's the purpose of what is the purpose of redesigning at this particular time? What is the purpose? The thinking ordinarily outside is that, well, all those politicians that have hidden money somewhere else for purpose of 2023, this is what this is an agenda to ensure that they will not be able to make good use of their money. And when you link this one to the recent announcement, whether it is true, whether it is not true, that the United States says come January 31st, any dollar printed prior to 2021 will not be tenable. No, that's fake news. So in this case, whether it is fake news, whether it is not fake news, they are talking about that. But in the context of Nigeria, my own concern is that, look, please, the Nigerian currency seems to me to be very dirty after months of use, just few months of use, just like the CFR franc. When you compare that one with a pound sterling, with a dollar, US dollar, they are always very clean. If we are talking about redesigning in terms of quality, I will agree. Now we are redesigning at this particular critical time when they cannot even address the problem of lecturers. Now you want to print money. And now we have been, I read in the newspapers that there will be limitation of how much you can deposit, you can save in your account, individual accounts, whether it is again fake news or whatever. But this is what we normally read. So please, at the end of the day, my major concern here is that let the government of Buhari think for once about our own interests, about our survival. They should not just be taking policies because they are in government, and therefore they will just decide unilaterally, and then the people will just continue to suffer.
Okay, Prof.
No, please.
Okay, Prof. Thank you very much, Professor Akintenewa. Thank you very much, Professor Anthony Kila. And thank you, Yemi Adamolekun. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. From our entire team in Lagos and Abuja, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching.